A Chinese ship collision has just lit a fuse in the South China Sea. And when two US warships steam into the same contested waters, the question becomes unavoidable. What happens next? Could this be the spark that drags the world's two biggest powers into a clash nobody is ready for? The backdrop is simple but explosive. A Chinese Coast Guard vessel chasing a small Philippine patrol ship made a reckless maneuver and collided with another Chinese vessel. Reports even suggest 4 Chinese personnel are missing at sea. The very next day, Beijing doubled down while Washington sent in 2 warships, the USS Higgins and USS Cincinnati, slicing through waters just 30 nautical miles from the shoal. But here's the real reason you can't look away. What followed wasn't just one incident. It was 7 rapid-fire escalations, each one more dangerous than the last. 7 steps that could tip the balance of power in Asia, ignite new military flashpoints, and change how the world's strongest navies test each other at sea and in the air. Stay with me, because by the end, you'll see why analysts say we may be standing closer to a regional showdown than at any point in the last decade. So watch carefully, because the final escalation on this list, the one I'll reveal at the end, could be the very trigger that pulls the entire region into a spiral of conflict. You don't want to miss it. Escalation number 1. The collision that sparked the fire, it all started with a reckless chase. A Chinese Coast Guard vessel locked onto the BRP Suluan, a much smaller Philippine patrol ship operating near Scarborough Shoal. Determined to block its path, the Chinese ship swung too hard, too fast, and in the chaos, it slammed into another Chinese vessel. For a moment, the world froze. Images of 2 Chinese ships colliding in contested waters were more than just a maritime mishap. They symbolized the sheer recklessness of Beijing's tactics. So aggressive, so desperate to assert dominance, that its own vessels crashed into each other. Reports even hinted that several crew members were thrown overboard, though Beijing quickly went silent on the details. But here's why this matters. Collisions aren't just accidents in the South China Sea. They are political earthquakes. Every bump, every scrape sends ripples across the region. And this one was the most dangerous in years. Suddenly, what could have been dismissed as a technical error turned into an international incident. The Philippines cried foul. The global press swarmed the story, and military analysts warned, if China's own aggressive maneuvers are this unstable, then every future encounter carries the risk of escalation. The fire had been lit, and there was no turning back. Escalation number 2, China's search and sweep. The day after the collision, Beijing wasted no time. Officially, it was a search and rescue mission. Unofficially, it looked a lot more like a show of force. 1 Chinese Coast Guard ship, backed by 8 maritime militia vessels, swept the waters around Scarborough Shoal, combing the area for the missing crew. At the very same time, 5 additional Coast Guard cutters and 14 militia boats tightened their grip on the shoal itself. Imagine that picture. Nearly 30 Chinese vessels clustered around a tiny reef, forming a floating wall that screamed control rather than compassion. And here's the catch. When China moves assets like this, it's never just about saving sailors. Every maneuver is calculated. Every ship placement, a signal. The so-called rescue operation doubled as a territorial flex, a way to remind the Philippines and the world that Beijing can flood contested waters with ships whenever it chooses. The result? A chilling message. Even in the face of an embarrassing accident, China turned the moment into a display of dominance. The line between humanitarian search and strategic sweep blurred completely. For the Philippines and for anyone watching, the signal was clear. Scarborough Shoal was not a rescue zone. It was Beijing's staging ground. Escalation number 3. US warships enter the scene. Then came the moment that turned a local crisis into a global standoff. Just as Chinese vessels swarmed Scarborough Shoal, 2 US Navy destroyers, the USS Higgins and the USS Cincinnati, appeared on the horizon. Their mission? A freedom of navigation operation, slicing through contested waters only 30 nautical miles from the shoal. The sight was electric. On one side, China scrambling to recover from a humiliating collision, its Coast Guard and militia clogging the sea. On the other, sleek American warships gliding in with calm precision, broadcasting one unmistakable message: these waters are not yours. Beijing erupted. State media declared that Chinese forces had warned and expelled the American ships, framing the move as a triumph of sovereignty. Washington fired back just as fast, insisting the operation was fully legal under international law, and daring Beijing to prove otherwise. Here's why this matters. US destroyers don't casually enter flashpoints. Every mile they steam forward is a calculated signal to allies, adversaries, and markets alike. With just 2 ships, Washington showed the Philippines it would not be left alone, while reminding Beijing that American steel still patrols Asia's most dangerous waters. And suddenly, a collision between Chinese vessels was no longer just China's embarrassment. It had become a US-China face-off, one slip away from confrontation. Escalation number 4, fighter jet in the sky. As if warships weren't enough, the confrontation took to the skies. A Chinese J-15 fighter jet locked onto a Philippine Coast Guard aircraft conducting a routine patrol. Instead of maintaining safe distance, the J-15 closed in, just 500 feet laterally and a mere 200 feet vertically. In aviation terms, that's a near miss. One wrong move, one gust of turbulence, and it could have ended in disaster. This was no coincidence. Fighter interceptions are among the riskiest games militaries play, and Beijing chose to play it dangerously. By buzzing so close to a Philippine plane, China wasn't just intimidating Manila. It was sending a warning shot to Washington too. Every Philippine patrol has American eyes on it, and Beijing knows it. So what's the fallout? Suddenly, the crisis wasn't limited to ships scraping hulls. It was an airspace confrontation, adding another dimension to an already combustible standoff. Analysts quickly pointed out that the last time Chinese fighters pulled stunts like this, even US pilots had to make split-second maneuvers to avoid catastrophe. At sea, collisions make headlines. In the air, they can spark wars. And with that J-15 roaring dangerously close, the South China Sea shifted from tense waters to a powder keg both above and below. Escalation number 5, the Philippine Defiance. While Chinese cutters and militia boats clogged the shoal, and US destroyers shadowed just offshore, one Philippine vessel stood its ground. The BRP Teresa Magbanua, a modest patrol ship compared to the giants circling nearby, held position 50 nautical miles from Scarborough Shoal. To Beijing, it was just another target to intimidate. To Manila, it was a symbol. The Philippines would not back down. Think about the optics. A single Philippine ship dwarfed by Chinese formations, refusing to retreat. It wasn't firepower that mattered here, it was defiance. And behind that defiance was a message. The Philippines is no longer facing China alone. With US destroyers on the horizon, every Philippine maneuver carried the weight of an alliance. But defiance comes with danger. Each day the Teresa Magbanua held position, the risk of harassment rose. Coast Guard cutters could block her. Maritime militia could swarm her. A fighter jet could buzz overhead. And yet Manila chose to stay. Here's the so what. Small states don't often stare down great powers. When they do, it changes the game. The Teresa Magbanua showed that even a small patrol ship can hold the line if backed by allies. And in this standoff, courage became just as important as capability. Escalation number 6, international alarm bells. By now, it wasn't just Manila and Washington watching Scarborough Shoal, it was the entire world. Japan issued sharp warnings about reckless maneuvers. Australia expressed grave concern. Even the European Union, often cautious in Indo-Pacific affairs, weighed in with statements urging restraint. Why the sudden global outcry? Because the South China Sea isn't just about rocks and reefs. It's about shipping lanes worth trillions of dollars each year. When Chinese ships crash into each other and American destroyers sail in, insurance markets notice, diplomats scramble, and military planners lose sleep. Security analysts rang the alarm louder than ever. Some compared the situation to a Cold War flashpoint, except this one involves more players and a far more interconnected global economy. Others warned of a domino effect. If one skirmish spirals out of control, treaty obligations could drag in nations from across the Pacific. So, what's the bottom line? A local collision had morphed into a global security concern. Scarborough Shoal was no longer just a Philippine problem. It was a litmus test for how the world responds to China's muscle flexing. If you think these escalations are already dangerous, hit that like button and subscribe, because the final escalation could be the most explosive of them all. Escalation number 7, the exclusion zone. Push finally came the move that tied everything together. China's attempt to enforce what experts call an exclusion zone around Scarborough Shoal. Beijing didn't officially declare it, but the tactics spoke louder than words. Coast Guard cutters formed barricades, militia boats patrolled like sentinels, and Philippine fishing vessels were shoved further and further out. On paper, the 2016 International Tribunal ruling said, "These waters are open to traditional fishing." In practice, Beijing was writing its own rulebook. And by turning a collision into an excuse for tighter control, China crossed from defensive posture to outright territorial enforcement. The message was unmistakable. Scarborough Shoal was China's to command, and anyone else would need to think twice before entering. For the Philippines, it meant fishermen once again pushed into poverty. For the US, it meant a direct challenge to freedom of navigation. And for the wider world, it meant Beijing was testing whether global law still mattered in contested seas. So what's the danger? Exclusion zones don't just restrict boats, they redraw boundaries. And every day, China holds the shoal tighter. The risk grows that the next confrontation won't just be hulls scraping or jets buzzing. It could be the first shot in a conflict no one can control. 7 escalations, one after another, each raising the stakes higher than the last. It began with a reckless Chinese chase and an accidental collision. It escalated with sweeping search operations that doubled as a show of force. Then, US destroyers entered the scene, bringing Washington and Beijing nose to nose. The crisis leapt into the skies with a J-15 buzzing a Philippine aircraft. The Philippines itself stood firm, holding its line against impossible odds. Soon, the world's major powers were sounding alarm bells. And finally, China pushed for de facto exclusion zones, rewriting the rules of the sea. The lesson is simple but chilling. In the South China Sea, nothing is just an accident. Every scrape, every maneuver, every flyby has consequences that ripple across the globe. What looks like a small clash of ships can quickly become a flashpoint for great power conflict. And when freedom of navigation collides with territorial ambition, the result is a tinderbox waiting for a spark. So what does it mean for you, watching from halfway around the world? It means the balance of power in Asia is shifting in real time, and the decisions made around Scarborough Shoal could shape global security for years to come. Now it's your turn. Do you believe China will keep escalating until it collides directly with the US? Or will diplomacy pull us back from the brink? A. China will push further, risking open conflict. B. Diplomacy will ease the tension. Comment A or B below, and don't forget to subscribe. The next escalation could happen tomorrow, and you won't want to miss it.